Welcome to Airmanship 2.0 Case Study Number 8, Too Hot to Handle. I'm Dave Cook, the Executive Director of the Center for Airmanship Excellence. Quick checkout for those of you who have not attended a GoToWebinar before. I see some new names on the roster this evening, so I'll assume that at least some of you haven't attended an online webinar. This is your control panel you should have in the upper right-hand part of your screen or someplace on your screen. You notice the white arrow in the orange rectangle. If you click on that, it will collapse your control panel. Click on it again, it will expand it. Here you see the icon for raise your hand. That's the main way that I monitor what folks have any questions or want to make a comment during the webinar. However, I have a long list here this evening of attendees, and I can only see about 6 names at a time and 6 hands at a time, so I need to scroll up and down and do that periodically. So if you have raised your hand with a question or a comment and I don't get to you right away, be patient. I will get to you. I'm not using the text box. If you send me a question, and if you have a text box on your control panel, I won't see it this evening. So if you have a question or comment, again, please raise your hand. All right, let's do a little test here and see who's paying attention. Would you please raise your hand now? Click on that raise your hand icon right here. Okay, I see hands going up. Give you a little more time. Okay, good. I'm seeing most of the hands up. Not a couple of them not yet. Either they just hooked up and then went away, or they haven't found their raise their hand icon. Okay, good enough. I'm going to put all the hands down, and that's how you're going to communicate with me if you want to make a comment or ask a question. So as you've already noticed, this is a PowerPoint presentation. However, no sleeping, because you're going to get a Wings Program credit, a basic knowledge credit for attending the webinar this evening. The webinar sponsors are the FAA Safety Team and the Center for Airmanship Excellence. All right, I'd like to find out who's on the webinar here with us this evening. So I'm going to open up mics for a few of you so we can get this kind of information. If you'd like to share with us what kind of flying you do now, what kind of airplanes you fly, how much flying you're doing, and what brought you to this webinar. And I know you got a Wings Program SPANS announcement, but I mean, why did you want to attend this webinar is that question. So if you would like to share some of those things with us, some or all, please raise your hand right now. And if I don't see any hands go up here in a little bit, I will select a couple of people at random. Here we have a hand up, Renee Shales. Renee, are you there? Renee? Okay, this happens sometimes. Either the person who has a mic hooked up, it isn't hooked up right, or they decide not to talk when I call on them. So let me go through the list here a couple more times. Here's Joseph Imlikowski. Joseph, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Well, welcome.
I'm on the network. Thank you. Most of my time is 172s. Graduated to ultralights about 15 years ago due to diabetes. And point with pride with my ultralight experience, I had 3 opportunities to practice my off-field landing skills. That never happened in general aviation. And that's one of the reasons I'm here on the seminar. Training takes over. There was never a moment of panic.
Great. Well, thank you, Joseph, for sharing that with us. I'm going to mute your mic just to take care of feedback problems. Yeah, ultralight flying is a lot of fun. I've done some myself. Used to be in the hang glider game. And, of course, I'm a big proponent of LSAs now, which are, I guess one could say, a step up from the ultralights. But that's some good flying, and thank you for sharing those experiences with us, especially about the training kicking in. I found the same thing. When I get in a tight spot, the training always kicks in. Jeffrey Shalakis. Jeffrey, if I didn't mess up your last name there, too bad. Are you with us?
Close.
Okay,
absolutely.
Great.
Yep, I typically fly in SR I fly for both business and pleasure. I fly about 5 to 10 hours a month, and when I can't fly, I try to either bone up in terms of books or on webinars.
Well, great. Thanks, Jeffrey. Appreciate it. That's SR-22 is certainly a nice airplane. I envy your flying that. Let me take a look here on the roster and see if anybody else has their hand up. Here's one, Stephen Franks. Stephen, your mic is open.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Well, I just do recreational flying, and right now I'm working on my IFR rating, 172s, and I'm also checked out in a Piper Archer. And I'm flying about 16 hours a month right now. And as far as I love these webinars, I come to as many as I can. They're pretty informative.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephen. I've closed your mic. Thanks for sharing that with us. And that's for all the hands that are up right now. So I'll put all the hands down, and we'll proceed. But thank you all who shared your background and what kind of flying you're doing. I appreciate it. Well, this webinar is a case study, but we're looking at it from the point of view of Airmanship 2.0. I know some of you have attended these webinars before on Airmanship 2.0 or aspects of Airmanship 2.0, and many of you on the roster this evening have not. So I'm going to do a real quick look or briefing on this for you, but I've got to start out by defining that asterisk I put up there by Airmanship 2.0. It's as defined by the Center for Airmanship Excellence. So you're not going to find Airmanship 2.0 in the Airman's Information Manual, the FAA Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, or any place else. This is the term that we coined for what we're going to talk about. And this is just I call it the Flight Level 510 Recon Flyby. You're not going to get an in-depth look at what Airmanship 2.0 is here this evening, but I want to give you some information on it so that you can put our case study in context. And if you've already heard the briefing on Airmanship 2.0, now would be a good time to go grab a cup of coffee. This will only take, though, about 3 or 4 minutes. In Airmanship 2.0, we use what we call the Kern Airmanship Model. Here's the model here. And the Kern Airmanship Model is really the scaffold upon which we build our airmanship knowledge and our airmanship skills. Let's take just a little closer look at the Kern Airmanship Model. You can see the Kern Airmanship Model is made up of 3 bedrock principles: discipline, skill, and proficiency. Then upon those 3 bedrock principles rest the 5 pillars of knowledge: knowledge of self, knowledge of aircraft, knowledge of team, knowledge of environment, knowledge of risk. And upon the 5 pillars of knowledge rest the capstone outcomes of situational awareness and judgment. Another way to look at Airmanship 2.0 is that it asks the question, if I don't fly right, should I fly at all? And of course the answer to that with Airmanship 2.0 is, if you're going to fly, do it right. And this is a quote from Chuck Yeager. I'm sure you all know who he is. And it was taken out of the book Redefining Airmanship by Dr./Colonel Tony Kern, who was the first guy to put that airmanship model together. That's why we call it the Kern Airmanship Model. And this quote comes right out of that book. However, you probably have the same reaction I did when I first saw this, is that, well, yeah, sure, Yeager was probably saying this when he looked like he does here in this picture. He's a general, he's in his 60s, getting more conservative, a little more paranoid about flying and so forth. But Kern anticipated that question, and in his book he explains that Yeager's been saying this since he was a young test pilot. So I couldn't agree more. If you're going to go up and fly, you have to do it right. So that's another way to look at Airmanship 2.0. It's doing it right. Airmanship 2.0 is a new paradigm in personal flying. It's based on tried and true airmanship principles that have proven to be effective with the airlines and military, but modified for use by us personal flyers in today's flight environment at a reasonable cost. Airmanship 2.0 is a new way for you to enjoy flying. It's a new approach to maximizing the personal rewards you get from flying. And Airmanship 2.0 increases the value you get for your flying dollar. And we're all looking for that. We want to get more bang for our bucks. Airmanship 2.0 continuously enhances your airmanship skills, knowledge, and capabilities. In other words, Airmanship 2.0 is a surefire way for you to become a safer, more proficient aviator. Airmanship 2.0 includes flying in what we call an Airmanship Development Support Organization. That could be a flying club, a flight school, a rental operation, a partnership, or just you yourself if you have a real Airmanship Development Support Organization. And there are a lot of things that go into that to make it a real Airmanship Development Support Organization. But when you're practicing Airmanship 2.0, you're flying within some kind of an ADSO that's supporting you. Also, Airmanship 2.0 includes belonging to a high-performing safety culture, formal safety culture with these elements in it. It also includes using a formal safety management system. Airmanship 2.0 also includes a flight operations support team that can provide trip planning, flight dispatch, flight tracking, in-flight support, and trip management. So I said that was going to be quick, the 51,000-foot flyby, and that's only the tip of the iceberg on the subject of Airmanship 2.0. But I hope that put a little context in it for you as we go through our case study this evening. You can find out everything you want to know about Airmanship 2.0 at the Center for Airmanship Excellence website, airmanshipexcellence.org. And you'll see there's a menu selection button for Airmanship 2.0. That's a subweb, has several video briefings and other information pertaining to Airmanship 2.0. All right. Do you have any comments or questions about Airmanship 2.0? If you do, please raise your hand. I'm scrolling through the roster right now. Joseph Imikowski, I don't think your hand went down. I just put it down, but if you have your hand up again, Joseph, or if you want to put your hand up, there it is. Okay, I got it up again. Go ahead, Joseph. Your mic is open.
I'm trying to get my hand to go down.
Okay, sometimes that's a problem. I see Jerry Feet. Jerry, your hand was going up, but I see your mic is not operative right now. Okay, give me one more second just to make sure there are no more hands up. And again, this takes a little time because I've got to scroll through the roster. Okay, don't see anybody with any questions or comments at this point, so we'll move on. This is Airmanship 2.0 case study number 8, Too Hot to Handle. This case study will examine an airmanship-related accident that could have been prevented if the pilot had been practicing Airmanship 2.0. Now, we're not pointing fingers at anybody, though, as we go through this case study, because as we all know, mistakes are the portals of discovery, as James Joyce said. As pilots, we have learned to learn from others' mistakes. That's a better way to do it, and case studies are one way of doing that. Really, what we're trying to do is learn how in practice how to identify links in error chains. Now, you've probably all heard about error chains. That's one of the ways we look at Airmanship 2.0 or look at cockpit resource management or safety management. It turns out that most accidents are the result of error chains that have 5 to 7 links in them. Now, they could have more or fewer, but that's about what it runs, 5 to 7 links. So the idea is to identify a link in an error chain as it presents itself and then eliminate it or mitigate it. And if we do that, then we won't have an accident. This case study is based on the NTSB's Aircraft Accident Summary Report, in-flight fire, emergency descent, and crash in a residential area, Cessna 310 Romeo, November 501 November in Sanford, Florida, on July 10th, 2007. The 310 was owned by NASCAR Corporate Aviation Division, not any of the teams. It was the corporation's airplane. They were a Part 91 corporate operation. The flight was operated on an IFR flight plan. There were 2 occupants, both pilots, and they died in the crash. 3 people on the ground were killed. The flight departed Daytona Beach International Airport for Lakeland and crashed while performing an emergency diversion to Orlando Sanford International Airport, just to the northeast of Orlando. The airplane and 2 homes were destroyed by impact forces and post-crash fire. This is an actual aerial photograph of the crash scene. He came in from this direction. You can see the crash path right here. He clipped a palm tree, got by the first 2 houses, then hit the second house and the third house. That's where the main wreckage was left. And you can see both of those houses burned. Let's take a look at the 2 pilots that were flying the airplane. The PIC first. He was 53 years old, commercial pilot with single-engine, multi-engine, and instrument ratings. He was a medical doctor hired by NASCAR as a medical officer, not on NASCAR's payroll as a pilot, however. He occupied the left seat during the accident flight. He had an FAA third-class medical certificate dated on December 2005 with no limitations. He had 276 total flight hours, 106 of which were in multi-engine airplanes, and 26 hours of which were in Cessna 310 airplanes. So he was, in my opinion, relatively low time. However, he did have quite a bit of multi-time in relation to his total time, but he was very low time in the Cessna 310. U.S. Air Force accident studies have shown that unless you have about 400 hours in a particular type of airplane, you're at increased risk for mistakes and accidents. He had flown about 11 hours and 6 hours respectively in the 90 and 30 days before the accident flight. So he was fairly current. He last flew the accident airplane only 4 days before the accident. The day before the accident, the PIC saw patients in his office from 0800 to 1300 and then returned home. He did not perform any scheduled or emergency surgeries, nor was he on call after he left the office. So we can assume that he was probably well rested, although you never know what kind of a night's sleep he got or what went on in the evening before the flight. Well, let's take a look at the other pilot. We'll call him the safety pilot. He was age 56. He was hired by NASCAR as a pilot on October 1, 1985, so he had a lot of years with NASCAR, which is a good indication he was a good pilot, or they wouldn't have kept him around. He held a first-class FAA Airman Medical Certificate dated June 2007 with the limitation must wear corrective lenses. He occupied the right seat during the accident flight. He held a multi-engine ATP certificate and type ratings in several business jets, and here you can see some of those jets. Oops, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. Still talking about the safety pilot. He had 10,580 total hours, 67 hours of which were in the Cessna 310. So a lot of total time, but again, low time in the type. He had flown about 50 and 70 hours respectively in the 90 and 30 days before the accident flight. So fairly active for a professional pilot. The day of the accident was the safety pilot's third duty day in the last 9 days. So it wasn't a real hard schedule he was flying, obviously. He last flew the accident airplane with the PIC 4 days before the accident. So he also flew recently in that airplane. The safety pilot was not on duty the day before the accident. On the day of the accident, his duty day began about 0700, which was about an hour and a half before they departed. So he got up probably about 5, I would think, to make that 0700 check-in. So, he might have been fatigued. I know I have a real hard time when I have to get up at 5 in the morning, getting a full 8 before that the night before. So who knows, but there might have been some fatigue factor involved with the safety pilot. The accident flight was his first flight of the day. Now their training, the accident pilots received formal 310 training The PIC and safety pilot completed that proficiency training on January, January 25th, so not too long before the accident. The PIC's instructor stated that he needed extra classroom instruction and an additional 2 hours of simulator instruction to pass the course. Now, that's not real surprising to me. I've done a lot of simulator instructing for those kind of guys and these kind of airplanes. And for a low-time guy like that, it sometimes takes a little more work to get them through the course. The instructor stated that the chief pilot of NASCAR told him that the commercial pilot would never fly the Cessna 310 without another pilot on board. The instructor stated that although he was aware of this stipulation, the commercial pilot successfully completed the training program by his own merits. During the post-accident interviews, the safety pilot's instructor stated that he was highly qualified, required little or no academic instruction, and showed exceptional proficiency during his 2 simulator sessions. And this is what I would expect of a pilot with his background. Cessna, the 310 is a simple airplane compared to those jets he was flying, and he obviously knew how to learn airplanes, become familiar with them, so it doesn't surprise me that he was ready to go when he got into that training. The safety pilot completed the training in less than the program syllabus time. According to NASCAR Aviation Division personnel, the safety pilot's Cessna 310 training was conducted to enable him to serve as the safety pilot for the PIC. So in case you missed it as we went through all that info, the setup was the PIC was a doctor working for NASCAR as a doctor, not as a pilot, relatively low time. Must have been part of his compensation package that NASCAR let him fly the 310, but because NASCAR had a policy, and was probably a provision of their insurance policy too, that the PIC of any one of their airplanes would be an ATP, they made arrangements that the doctor could fly the airplane as long as he had an ATP with him. History of the flight. They departed Daytona Beach about 08:22, and at about 08:35, only 13 minutes later, the airplane crashed while performing an emergency diversion to Orlando Sanford. The 2 pilots on board the airplane and 3 people on the ground were killed, as we mentioned. What we didn't mention was that 4 people on the ground received serious injuries. So it wasn't just the pilots that paid for their mistake. The airplane and 2 homes were destroyed by impact forces and a post-crash fire. Visual meteorological conditions prevailed at the time of the accident. According to NASCAR Corporate Aviation Division personnel, the commercial pilot was acting as pilot in command for the personal flight, with the ATP acting as safety pilot. According to NASCAR policies, a pilot acting as PIC on a NASCAR airplane must hold an ATP certificate. However, they had a special deal going for the doctor, as I mentioned. The airplane was not equipped with built-in fire extinguishing system, nor was it required to be so equipped, although airplanes of that vintage usually had as an option engine fire bottles, as you can see a picture of one there. NASCAR personnel stated that the handheld fire extinguisher was installed in the airplane as required by regs and was mounted on the cockpit floor just forward of the right side pilot seat. Investigators were unable to locate the airplane's handheld fire extinguisher in the wreckage, and therefore could not determine if the pilots engaged in any smoke or firefighting efforts. About 08:32:49, which was about 10 minutes after takeoff, shortly after reaching a cruise altitude of 6,000 feet, the safety pilot contacted air traffic control to declare an emergency, stating, "Smoke in the cockpit, we need to land at Sanford." The flight was cleared to proceed directly to Sanford and descend to 2,000 feet. Radar data indicated that the airplane subsequently turned toward Sanford and began to descend. Okay, I'm going to pause just 1 second while I check the roster to see if anyone has their hand up with a question or comment. By the way, if at any time you see the slides moving and you don't hear me talking, please all raise your hands, because I sometimes mute my mic to clear my throat or to take a sip of water, and I forget to unmute it. So if you see that happening, please let me know. Or conversely, if you hear me talking and don't see the slides moving, let me know. Okay, Jeffrey Feet, I see that your mic is open. Jerry Feet, I'm sorry. Do you have a comment or question, Jerry?
No, I hear you, David. I'm here.
Okay, fine. There's sometimes the system raises hands when you don't mean to do it. So I just was checking to make sure you didn't have a question or comment. So all the hands are down. We're going to proceed. The last radio transmission from the airplane was received about 08:33:15. This transmission terminated mid-sentence and seemed to include the phrase, "Shut off all radios, electrical." This phrase was consistent with the checklist guidance for in-flight fire or smoke emergency in the Cessna 310R Pilot Operating Handbook, which stated electrical load reduced to minimum required. Now I'm going to stop here just for a second, because this is one of my soapboxes, this electrical fires in these old airplanes. I spent about 5 years giving initial and recurrent training at a simulator center, Glass Simulator Center out at Aurora Airport, and primarily working with guys who were flying older twin-engine Cessnas, 421s, 310s, 340s, etc. And I flew a Cessna Conquest II turboprop for about 1,200 hours, and it was about a 30-year-old airplane when I flew it, and it had old wiring in it. So I've had experience with old wiring, and I've instructed on this particular subject. So this is kind of one of the soapboxes I like to get on. And I think it's really important because of the training that most of us in general aviation have received about handling electrical smoke and fire problems. Most of the checklists in our airplanes say something like this: electrical load reduced to minimum required. Well, my opinion, the only way to comply with that checklist item, the best way, is to turn off all electrical power immediately. Because if you start turning off each electrical user one by one, trying to determine when that smoke is going to go out, you can have a blazing fire going, or you can have the cockpit filled with smoke before you ever figure out which user it was. In my opinion, the first step when you smell electrical smoke in the cockpit, or you see a fire, or you see smoke, is to just hit that gang bar and turn off the alternator and the master switch immediately, so that you cut off all electrical power to the airplane. So sorry for that diversion, but that's again one of my soapboxes I get on frequently. The Safety Board's aircraft performance radar study indicated that the last transponder signal from the accident airplane was received about the time of the last radio transmission. So probably the electrical system failed. If they were going through that reducing power, they may or may not have shut off the master, and if they hadn't, then the power to the transponder and the transceiver probably failed at the same time. Although it could have been they shut off the master. At that time, the airplane was about 8 nautical miles northwest of Sanford and was turning toward the airport while rapidly descending. Primary radar returns that were recorded for about another minute and a half showed the airplane maintaining a heading of about 150 degrees towards Sanford. Here's a closer-up view of the sectional and the Sanford area. Here's his location. At this point we just looked at here, last primary radar return, he was about 3 miles northwest of Sanford and descending through 1,200 feet AGL. The airplane subsequently crashed in a residential area about 0.7 nautical miles west of the last primary radar return. So note that west would be he turned away from the airport for some reason. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. According to several witnesses near the accident site, the airplane was traveling extremely fast, was very low, and its wings were rocking as it descended. Just before impact, the airplane entered a steep bank and made a sharp turn to the west. Several witnesses reporting seeing smoke trailing from the airplane, and one witness stated smoke was trailing from the port side, the left side. Here's the NTSB's diagram of the accident site. And you can see here that the aircraft would be, let me point out, by the way, here's the compass rose, the west is up. So if they were going southeast, which the radar trace had them, they were going southeast, so they came in from over here. Trees, there were trees with strike damage and parts here just to the east of the actual crash site. So then they made that right turn that the witnesses talked about. Here's the crash path. They and notice that's west. That was a westerly heading they turned to. They struck a palm tree in this location. They found a portion of the glare shield laying on one of the houses that hadn't burned here, so the airplane was coming apart at that point. Fire damaged house was the first house that they set on fire. Then another fire damaged house. Here's the location of the fuselage, wing roots, and the landing gear. Here's the tail section where it ended up. The cabin door came off and ended up over here. And the whole fire area is outlined by this dashed line. So all of this was on fire in here. On a flight in the accident aircraft the day before the accident, another company pilot had turned off the weather radar and manually pulled the related circuit breaker, cutting electrical power to the system in response to a weather radar system malfunction and a burning smell. The burning smell subsequently went away, according to the pilot's entry in the airplane's maintenance discrepancy binder, and the pilot flew the airplane for more than an hour without further incident before landing. Company records indicate that the weather radar system was installed in the airplane in May 1988, so almost 30 years before the crash. An associated 5-amp circuit breaker was located on the bottom row of the main circuit breaker panel, with associated wiring located on the left cockpit sidewall to the left of the PIC's leg. You can see that this is the standard configuration for a 310R with the circuit breaker panel right down here. Examination of similar airplanes revealed that the densest concentration of wiring in a Cessna 310R airplanes is in this area. In addition, get this, fuel lines to instrument panel gauges are routed through this area. Isn't that wonderful? The events on the day before the accident indicate that an electrical problem existed in the weather radar components or related wiring. Pulling the circuit breaker for the weather radar stopped the symptom, the burning smell, of the problem by removing electrical power from the circuit. However, it did not correct the underlying problem. Airplane electrical system anomalies that result in smoke and or burning odors are indications of possible fire hazards and not to be messed with. Moreover, the heat, smoke, fumes, and restrictions to visibility associated with an in-flight fire can represent a significant hazard to airplane occupants and adversely affect airplanes' airworthiness. We all know that this old insulation is dangerous to your health. You don't want to be breathing it. It can incapacitate you. It generally swells your eyes shut in just a matter of seconds. It can obscure all the instruments. It can obscure the view out the window. Many airplanes, big and little, have crashed because of smoke in the cockpit. Therefore, the safety board concludes that the weather radar system anomaly that was experienced and formally documented by the NASCAR company pilot the day before the accident could have developed at that time into a significant in-flight smoke and fire event. However, the anomaly was temporarily alleviated when the company pilot pulled the related circuit breaker. Upon landing, the company pilot left the weather radar circuit breaker pulled. He placed the maintenance binder with the white copy of the discrepancy report on the throttle quadrant, which was their procedure, and provided the yellow copy and a verbal briefing of the incident to the director of maintenance. That was their in-house policy for maintenance, for reporting maintenance discrepancies. Sounds like a pretty good policy, and it was followed. He also reported the maintenance discrepancy to the maintenance technician who had primary responsibility for the accident airplane. If you read the full report, you'll see that that was a NASCAR policy. They had maintenance technicians assigned to each airplane. They had, 7 or 8 airplanes, mostly jets, in the fleet. So they had a guy that was responsible for this airplane. So the pilot of the day before even went to the extent of finding that guy and reporting the problem to him. So basically the problem was properly reported. Operations like NASCAR's aviation division may operate non-turbine powered airplanes with non-critical inoperative equipment if the inoperative item is not required for flight and is either removed from the airplane, the cockpit control placarded, and the maintenance recorded, or deactivated and placarded as inoperative. So that's your minimum equipment list regulation and your inoperative equipment regulation there. Further, federal regulations state that an appropriately rated pilot or mechanic must determine that the inoperative equipment does not constitute a hazard to flight. And the report didn't say it, but you also have to make a logbook entry to that effect and sign it. Post-accident interviews indicate that NASCAR's aviation director, director of maintenance, and chief pilot discussed the weather radar discrepancy on July 9th, the day before the accident, after the company pilot reported it. And by the way, again, in the full report, you see that all of these guys, the aviation director, director of maintenance, and chief pilot, are very, 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 very experienced aviation professionals. However, no one examined the airplane to investigate the discrepancy, breakdown in the system. No maintenance personnel stated that they had been in the airplane since the discrepancy was reported. No company personnel removed the airplane from service, reset the circuit breaker, placed a placard in the cockpit regarding the discrepancy, deactivated the weather radar system, collared the associate circuit breaker, or placed a placard in the cockpit indicating the system's inoperative status. These are all required by the FARs, and it wasn't done. The safety board concludes that without examining the weather radar system and then either removing the airplane from service or placarding the airplane and collaring the circuit breaker, as well as making a maintenance record entry, it was not permissible to fly the airplane under federal regulations. In other words, the airplane was unairworthy. The final safeguards against the operation of an airplane with an unresolved maintenance discrepancy is a thorough pilot pre-flight inspection. In this case, the safety board's investigation showed that both pilots had access to information that could have alerted them that the accident airplane had an unresolved maintenance discrepancy on the morning of the accident and could have led them to take appropriate actions to ensure that the discrepancy was addressed before flight. Unfortunately, they didn't. Post-accident interviews indicated that the safety pilot was specifically advised of the weather radar discrepancy by a telephone call from NASCAR's chief pilot the night before the accident flight, and in person by the maintenance technician who was responsible for the accident airplane the morning of the accident flight. So now we see a real breakdown here. On both occasions, the safety pilot dismissed the issues as unimportant, and the chief pilot obviously let him get away with it, and the maintenance technician who was responsible for the airplane talked to the safety pilot about it and still hadn't done anything about it, and that didn't prompt him to do anything about it. There is no indication that anyone specifically advised the PIC of the weather radar discrepancy. But he was the designated PIC for the accident flight, and as such, had primary responsibility for determining the airplane's airworthiness. The PIC was responsible for reviewing all maintenance discrepancy reports in the airplane's binder. The maintenance discrepancy binder was prominently placed on the throttle quadrant and would have been easy to review during the pre-flight inspection or before the airplane departed. The safety board concluded that the safety pilot and the PIC had sufficient information about the weather radar discrepancy and the burning smell to determine that the condition constituted a hazard to flight and to refuse the airplane unless and until additional actions were performed by maintenance personnel. The safety board further concludes that the pilots accepted the airplane as made available by NASCAR management and maintenance personnel, despite the fact that no diagnostic, corrective, or interim maintenance action had been taken to address the discrepancy. On the day before the accident, the airplane was flown uneventfully for at least an hour after the pilot pulled the weather radar circuit breaker. In contrast, on the accident flight, the airplane was only airborne for about 10 minutes before the pilots reported a problem, and the airplane crashed about 2 minutes later. Happened real fast, and it can happen real fast in any kind of cockpit smoke or fire situation. The most likely reason for the rapid onset of the problem is that one of the pilots reset the radar circuit breaker, thus reinitiating the development of a problem encountered on the previous flight. The circuit breaker would have been difficult for the safety pilot to reach, and all the circuit breakers were next to the left leg of the PIC, but nothing was found to indicate which pilot reset the circuit breaker or when. Examination of the wreckage also indicated that the heat of the in-flight fire was most intense in the area above the left side instruments, where wiring, including the weather radar wiring, and other combustible materials, fuel, were located. However, impact and fire damage to the airplane prevented physical confirmation that the circuit breaker was reset. So it's all circumstantial evidence that the circuit breaker was reset. Examination of heat and soot evidence on the instrument panel deck skin, which was not exposed to the intense post-crash fire. Remember, it ended up on top of that house that didn't burn, indicated that there had been a fire in the area forward of the left side instrument panel. The location of the cabin door, about 60 feet from the main wreckage, and the undamaged door latching pins indicated that the door was likely unlatched during flight to alleviate conditions of heat and smoke, and was subsequently thrown clear during the impact sequence. Also, the soot trail on the cabin door was consistent with the flow of smoke being drawn from below the instrument panel and out the door by the slipstream. So they were trying to get the smoke out of the cockpit. However, it was probably still being generated by the fire, and therefore they were getting it out, but it was being replaced rapidly. All right, here are the Ntsb findings, and I apologize. I know I've been reading quite a bit of text here, and I'm going to do quite a bit more right here, but I think it's important that we see what the Ntsb had to say word by word here. The weather radar system anomaly that was experienced and formally documented by the NASCAR company pilot the day before the accident could have developed at that time into a significant in-flight smoke and fire event. However, the anomaly was temporarily limited when the company pilot pulled the related circuit breaker. Without examining the weather radar system, and then either removing the airplane from service or placketing the airplane and collaring the circuit breakers, as well as making a maintenance records entry, it was not permissible to fly the airplane under federal regulations. The PIC and the safety pilot had sufficient information about the weather radar discrepancy and the burning smell to determine that the condition constituted a hazard of flight and to refuse the airplane unless and until additional actions were performed by maintenance personnel. The pilots accepted the airplane as made available by NASCAR management and maintenance personnel, despite the fact that no diagnostic, corrective, or maintenance action had been taken to address the discrepancy. There was insufficient evidence to conclusively determine the origin of the in-flight fire. It is likely that one of the pilots, consistent with routine and/or before starting engines checklist for the accident airplane, reset the weather radar circuit breaker, which restored electrical power to the weather radar system's wiring and resulted in the in-flight fire. This leads me to suspect that the PIC never looked at the maintenance manual or the maintenance discrepancy book that was in the airplane, because he would have been a real fool to see that right up and then reset that circuit breaker. So I suspect that he was probably relying on the ATP for knowing what was going on with the airplane. He was just cutting corners. He wasn't methodical and missed that part of his pre-flight. Who knows? But it's very likely that he pushed the circuit breaker back in his pre-flight setup, because that's what we're trained to do, and it says right on most checklists, circuit breakers check in. And a lot of pilots have been taught, here's another soapbox I'll get on for a minute, that it's perfectly all right to reset a circuit breaker, and if they've gotten training recently, they'll say it's okay to reset it one time. Some guys who got trained way back when will say, well, I'll reset it 2 or 3 times if I need it. I'll see what happens, or I'll wait till I need it and then reset the circuit breaker. Well, the current guidance, industry best practice, is to never reset a pop circuit breaker unless the component that it powers is essential, and you really need to push that breaker back in. But even then, you're going to be very careful to make sure you don't smell anything, and to just leave it in to get the job done and then pull it back out again. So the best policy, in other words, is never reset a circuit breaker. And here you can see why. These fires can develop very, very quickly. After analyzing the available evidence, it was not possible to definitively determine the events that led to the accident airplane's maneuvers away from Orlando Sanford International Airport. Remember, they were proceeding directly to the airport on a southeasterly course, and then they made, just before they impacted, they made a turnaround to a right turnaround to the west. I suspect that the safety pilot who was in the right seat could see the ground at least somewhat, and when he saw that space between those two rows of houses, he decided that was his last best shot. He put it in there, but that's a guess on my part too. Existing guidance and manuals provided by general aviation airplane manufacturers regarding the resetting of circuit breakers often does not consider the cumulative nature of wiring damage, and that the removal of power only temporarily stops the progression of such damage. I mentioned earlier that I operated an old Cessna twin Conquest II for about 1,200 hours, and it had old wiring, and we started having all kinds of wiring problems with that airplane because the insulation was the old type and it got brittle, and if maintenance guys, avionics guys would go in to try to find a short or a smell, I got smoke a couple of times, I got smell of burning wiring a couple of times. Whenever they go in to try to find the source of that, they'd peel the wire bundles apart, and every time they did that, they were likely to crack more of the insulation and set up other shorts. So it's just a real mess. And a lot of us are flying these older airplanes now, and it doesn't make a difference if it's a twin Cessna or a 172 or a Piper Cub with an electrical system. It's the old wiring needs to be changed, in my opinion, on all of these airplanes. But if you're flying one of those airplanes, I would be very, very sensitive to any kind of electrical problems, any shorts, any smells, any intermittent electrical outages, anything like that. If general aviation pilots, maintenance personnel, and operators had a more thorough understanding of the potential hazards of a reset circuit breaker, as outlined in Advisory Circular 120-80, they would be less likely to reset a tripped circuit breaker without knowing what caused that circuit breaker to trip. I'd highly advise you write down that AC number, 120-80, and you can get it. Of course, just ask the Google for it and get it for free off the inner tube, and read it thoroughly. It's not very long, but it's very informative. And if you trained a long time ago, you can see that the industry best practices have changed in this regard. Identification by an aircraft's manufacturer or those responsible for post-manufacture modifications, like installing that radar, of which an aircraft's systems are critical to a flight or a realm of flight, would enable pilots to make better informed decisions regarding which circuit breakers they should or should not attempt to reset before or during flight. And as we all know, most of these old pilot operating handbooks or whatever they are for our airplane don't do a real good job. They're nothing like the professional manuals we have in jets and that sort of thing. There's not a whole lot of detail. So, but you need to go to that manual and see what's there and understand all this. But then, of course, you need to dig much deeper by talking to people, reading about your type airplane, all of that sort of thing. So you know about these things. Okay, just about 3 more findings here. More thorough and continually updated guidance and information regarding maintenance and inspection of airplane electrical systems and wiring for general aviation maintenance personnel would increase the likelihood that they will be aware of current industry wiring-related concerns. such as deteriorated, aging, wiring, corrosion, improper wire installation and repairs, and contamination of wire bundles with metal shavings, dust, and fluids, and would greatly increase the likelihood that their work will comply with current best practices. So I'd suggest that you have a little chat with your maintainer next time you get a chance and just ask him what he thinks about the wiring in your airplane and see what he knows about current industry best practices. Although NASCAR's Corporate Aviation Division's standard operating procedures included procedures designed to ensure that the airplane maintenance discrepancies would be properly addressed and the airplane airworthiness maintained, there was no formal method for determining and ensuring that an airplane was safe for flight. No safety management system or a breakdown in the sketchy system they had. Thus, management, maintenance, and flight operations personnel allowed the operation of an airplane with a known and unaddressed discrepancy. So all these professional aviation people either didn't know about the regulation prohibiting them from allowing this airplane to fly, or they ignored it. Final finding, safety management system programs would provide corporate flight departments a formal system of risk management, safety methods, and internal oversight programs that could improve safety. And I'd extend this further. Anybody that flies, as I mentioned earlier, under Airmanship 2.0 should be using a formal safety management system. I don't care if it's corporate, charter, airline, military, or personal flying like we do. The probable cause. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable causes of this accident were the actions and decisions by NASCAR's Corporate Aviation Division's management and maintenance personnel to allow the accident airplane to be released for flight with a known and unresolved discrepancy, and the accident pilot's decisions to operate the airplane with that known discrepancy, a discrepancy that likely resulted in an in-flight fire. So let's take a few minutes here to see if we can identify some of these links in the error chain that led to this accident. Now, before I do that, I'm going to take a look at the roster and see if anybody has their hands up to ask a question or make a comment. Okay, the only hand I see up at this point is Jerry. Jerry, I know that's an anomaly. I pulled the circuit breaker on that. Your hand is up there again. Okay, no hands up, no questions or comments at this point. All right, let me ask you some poll questions as a way to analyze this, get a little interactive participation going here. Now, this takes me just a little bit to get each one of these poll questions up, so you'll have to bear with me. It sounds like you think I've fallen asleep as I go through this, but it's a multi-step process and I have to pay attention. So, all right, here's the first question. Which of the following are links in the error chain? Pick one. The safety pilot's experience level, the time of day, NASCAR's maintenance tracking system. Okay, I'm giving you a little time here to vote. Okay, we have a few more to vote. Give it a couple more seconds here. If you're going to give us your opinion, please vote now. Okay, I'm going to close it and share the results with you. So we can see 11% say the safety pilot's experience level. Well, I don't think he could have been any more experienced for that flight. But I can see where some of you might be looking at this and saying, yeah, that could be it, because the pilot in the left seat, the PIC, the less experienced pilot, could have definitely been exhibiting what we call excessive professional deference to the guy in the right seat. And so, as I mentioned earlier, he might have thought the guy in the right seat knew everything he needed to know about the airplane's maintenance and skipped over looking at the maintenance log. So that could be it. But otherwise, I think he was plenty experienced for that flight. The only problem there might have been his low time in the airplane itself. Most of you agree that the maintenance tracking system broke down, And that was a major link in the error chain. Okay, second question. Choose a link in the error chain from these three. I'll give you time to vote, time to make your selection. Okay, looks like everybody's voted. I will close the poll and share the results with you. Well, about 4% said the geographic location. That was a factor. I mean, obviously, if they were right next to the airport, they could have gotten to the airport before they burn up. So that I guess we could say that was a link, but I don't see that as a major link. It didn't contribute to the accident. 89% said the reported burning smell the day before was a big link in the error chain, and I agree with that. And 6% say the safety pilot's training in the 310 was a link in the error chain. Okay, I'm going to hide that. Next one. Do you see an error chain link in the below list? And if you do, pick one. Okay, still some voting going on. Okay, looks like everybody's voted. Close it, share the results with you. And we can see here that 96% of you say the safety pilot's cavalier attitude, and I would agree with you 100% on that. 4% say the performance of the 310. Yeah, I guess that could have been a little link there, or maybe, I don't really see clearly how that applies. And nobody said ATC's handling. It looked to me like ATC did a pretty good job of helping them out. All right, next question. Do you see, oops, I'm sorry, I got to launch it here. There you go. And pick a link in the error chain on this one. Okay, looks like everybody's voted. Close it, share it with you. Oh my gosh, look at that. 100% of all the pilots attending the webinar this evening agree. That's a first. Great, I agree with you. That's obviously a link in the error chain. Okay, I'll hide that one. And the next one. So select the link here. Still a little voting going on. Give it a couple more seconds. Okay, looks like everybody has voted. And I'll share the results. And 100%, hey, agreement again. Both pilots accepting an unworthy airplane was definitely a link in that error chain. I'll hide that. The next one, got a couple more here. And is one of these links in the error chain? A few more voting still. Okay, looks like everybody's voted. I'll share it with you. And 92% say the resetting of the weather radar CB was a link. It sure was. 6% improper use of checklist. Yeah, I could agree with that if they use that pre-start checklist to reset that circuit breaker without thinking about it. and 2% executing a non-standard procedure. I think it's a link in the air chain. So most of us think it was resetting of that circuit breaker. I'll hide that, and the next one, and launch it. And are any of these links in the air chain? Still some voting going on. Okay, looks like everybody's voted. I'll close it, share it with you. 20%, lack of flight discipline. Maybe, although I think they were fairly, there's no real evidence indicating that they weren't disciplined pilots, but except for that PIC not checking the maintenance log, if that's what happened, that would be a breakdown in discipline. So that I would agree with that. The age of the aircraft's wiring, I certainly would agree with that as a link in the air chain. So that's all. Let me hide that. And those are all the 7 links in the air chain, by the way, were all that I could pick out of the accident report. I might have missed 1 or 2, but remember I mentioned earlier, the word is that all accidents are a result of an error chain with 5 to 7 links in it. So this one had 7 that we identified. So very good. I think everybody's getting the hang of identifying these links in the error chain. And of course, the real trick is doing that in real time in your everyday practice of airmanship. All right, let me just take a quick look here. We only have a few more things to look at on the Airmanship 2.0 issues as they relate to this flight. I think one of the things is that we need to use industry best practices under Airmanship 2.0. That's a big part of it. In this case, Advisory Circular 120-80, these folks obviously weren't using it. And if they had been practicing Airmanship 2.0, they would have. The safety culture that existed within NASCAR, I would say it was, for the time and the place and the situation, it was probably about typical of safety cultures and those kinds of organizations, but it obviously wasn't a formal safety culture the way that Airmanship 2.0 talks about it. The safety management system there was not very good, not very robust. They had a breakdown in it. Safety management systems are designed to pick up breakdowns, problems, hazards, risks, and then mitigate those risks, and then check that they've been mitigated and keep on checking. They didn't have a good safety management system, which you would if you were practicing Airmanship 2.0. If you are, as a pilot, practicing Airmanship 2.0, you know that knowledge of aircraft is extremely important. It's part of the current airmanship model, one of the 5 pillars of knowledge. I think that at least the PIC didn't have a whole lot of aircraft knowledge, but aircraft knowledge is not only knowledge of systems and how to operate the airplane, it's the current airworthiness status of the airplane as part of airworthiness knowledge. Knowledge of team. That's a pillar of knowledge in the current airmanship model. If you're practicing Airmanship 2.0, you'll learn how to use your team, how to work with your team, how to know your team, understand your team. And there was a major breakdown in the team play here among the NASCAR aviation department folks. Knowledge of environment is one of the 5 pillars of knowledge that you're aware of and use if you're practicing Airmanship 2.0, and that obviously broke down here. Knowledge of environment, I like to choose to believe that they were vague on those FARs on how you in-op something, because there's been a lot of confusion about that in general aviation. There's no confusion with the jets. The policies and procedures are really well laid out, but in these little airplanes, not so much. And so it could have been that among the maintenance people or the chief pilot or the ATP, some of these folks, that they just didn't know about that and it wasn't handled properly. And knowledge of risks. If you are practicing Airmanship 2.0, you use a formal risk assessment tool, or some people call it a flight risk assessment tool, a FRAT or a RAT. But it formally steps you through all the risks associated with any given flight. And part of the one area in the assessment has to do with aircraft. And so that would have driven both of these pilots to go through the maintenance status of the airplane, and they would have recognized that risk if they had done that. So these are the things that I saw in going through the case study, that if they had been practicing Airmanship 2.0, they would have removed one or more of the links in that error chain, and there would not have been an accident. All right, I have one final poll question for you. Let me stand by one while I launch it here. And do you think this accident could have been prevented if the pilots and NASCAR Aviation Department managers had been practicing Airmanship 2.0? So I just gave you my opinion. I'd like your opinion on whether or not you think Airmanship 2.0 would have prevented this accident had they been practicing it. Okay, a couple more to vote here. Okay, it looks like everybody's voted. I will close it. And 98% said yes. 2% said no. I'm curious. I'm going to let me go to the roster, and if one of you folks who put your hand up, that might only be one of you with a number here tonight, but might be a couple, put your hand up or voted for the no on that one. If you'd care to share your thinking, I'm really curious on why you said that. So stand by while I scroll through the list. Stand by. It's a long list tonight, so it takes me just a little bit to get through it. Okay, Steve Serby. Steve, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to comment on this, or were you one of the guys that voted no, Steve?
I didn't vote no, Dave. I was asking a previous question.
Okay, go ahead. We'll tackle that now.
The question I had is, when we're going through the accident chain there, I was just curious if you were the one that was posting the 5 links. Were those questions that you came up with yourself, or was that part of an investigation, or how did we arise with those 5 chain links?
Yeah, there were actually 7. No, those I identified those links. They were not the NTSB doesn't spell out those links in their reports as links in an error chain. So I pulled them out of there. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. Put everybody's okay. I don't see any other hands up. All right. Well, if one of you who voted no, I really appreciate hearing why you voted that way. So please send me an email or give me a phone call. I'd like to know why this, because I may be missing something here. Okay. Let's move on. There's our comments and questions. So here are some suggested next steps if you think Airmanship 2.0 may be worth a closer look. I suggest you register for airmanship updates on airmanshipexcellence.org, the Center for Airmanship Excellence website, and you'll get periodic updates of things that are going on and changes. Look for Wings Program briefings you miss at airmanshipexcellence.org. There's an Airmanship Excellence archive section. Go in there, and we post the video recordings of all of these Wings Program webinars there. You can view the Airmanship 2.0 briefings that I mentioned earlier at airmanshipexcellence.org. You can subscribe to Captain Dave's Hangar. That's my blog. Just talk about airmanship, nothing else, not politics or anything. And you can subscribe to that. It's free. You watch for Airmanship 2.0 case study number 9, Rocky Mountain High. And that will be on April 12th is when that's planned to be aired. And I'd like to ask you finally to spread the word about Airmanship 2.0. We believe at the Center that Airmanship 2.0, for a lot of reasons, is actually critical to personal flying. We must, the vast majority of us who are flying for our personal pleasure and transportation need to be practicing Airmanship 2.0, and if we don't, we believe that personal flying in the U.S. is going to atrophy quickly. It already is, but we're in a graveyard spiral, but it looks to us like it's about to tighten up, maybe beyond the point of no return. We believe that Airmanship 2.0 can pull us out of that graveyard spiral for a lot of reasons. Again, too many to go into right here, so that takes me back to suggesting that you go look at those Airmanship 2.0 briefings at airmanshipexcellence.org. And there's the website again. That's what you'll see when you land there. Well, I'd like to thank you for attending this evening and for your participation. And I'd like, if you'd like to contact me with any questions or comments, there's a good phone number for me. Or you can send me an email at this address, or go to airmanshipexcellence.org and click on the contact button, and you can send me an email that way. And in closing, I'd like to leave you with this thought: fly safely.